All right, we are now recording. So it was important to me to give this lecture before the midterm break, because this is where I try to really sum up everything that's happened so far in the topic, and where I'm going to really try to present to you my view on this issue. Let's recap where we are. Our goal for this first half of the topic is to understand what happiness is. Later on, we'll think about more particular strategies towards happiness. But first and foremost, our goal is to understand what happiness is. By happiness, we mean a life that is good for the person whose life it is. And the methodology that we have in this case is a descriptive one. It is how, in fact, do people seek out and verify their own happiness? What we might call a naturalistic method that is just assumed in other academic subjects like psychology or sociology, but is not assumed in philosophy. In philosophy, we make this big distinction between how things are and how things ought to be. We recognize that the way things are could be bad, even if everyone thinks they're good, right? So just because something is the case does not make it that it's worthwhile or that it should be the case. However, the response to that sort of challenge is that there's no way for us to recognize whether or not something is good unless we look at how, in fact, people do respond to it. So anytime you suggest that something is good or part of a good life, we have to look at how people, in fact, evaluate that. This still maintains that distinction between how things are and how things ought to be. This distinction between fact and values. It's just saying that our evidence for what is valuable is evidence of facts about how people value, if that's clear enough. Okay, so that's our background. And then we've looked recently at desire theories, which may be described as the currently dominant approach to the philosophy of happiness. And the great attraction of desire theory is that it allows for more than one possible good life. And it has this special quality where we're not going to be forcing on people anything that they don't want. We're not going to be telling them that things are good for them if they don't, in fact, want it for themselves. The problem for desire theory is that some things we desire seem to be bad for us. And we need a standpoint from which we can say why they're bad for us. So the appeal to drives was an attempt to overcome that problem. It's still like a desire, it's still coming from the person, but it doesn't rely on what that person believes. So the person can have all manner of strange and irrational beliefs about what's good for them. And what makes them strange and irrational is that they are in conflict with these more fundamental, biological processes that demand certain goods like food and water and social attachment, knowledge, things like this. Drive theory, however, is not ideal because it's very easy to satisfy a drive. You know, you can just be nibbling at food the moment you're hungry, never really developing a very meaningful life. So because of this problem of trivial and greedy satisfaction, it seems we need a way, if we're going to build on the drive theory, to say why some ways of satisfying drives are better than others. Whether there's like a good way of doing it or a way that's more powerfully endorsable by the person. So this is the kind of background where we are right now. Meanwhile, we've got some interesting evidence about how, in fact, people do lead good lives. So you might be aware that there's been a few studies running for decades that track people over the course of their lives and the factors that lead them to state for themselves whether or not they're having a good life. So the longest one of these is the Harvard study of adult development that's been going for like 90 years or whatever. And one of the big findings from these studies is that a major determinant, perhaps the most central determinant of people's happiness over the long term, is the quality of their personal relationships. So are they maintaining friendships, marriages, relations with their children, and so on? And so taking that evidence, we might think, okay, well, can we build a theory of happiness around that? In particular, can we build a theory of happiness around the pursuit of these loving relationships? As just a prima facie attraction of that view, it does look as if building these loving relationships is one of the main things that people in fact do to seek happiness over the long term. So again, if we're following this method of how in fact people do this stuff, then seeking out loving relationships is one of the most central ways in which people do that. That's already a reason to think we've got part of our answer here. Now, it's interesting just for a second to think, like, what do you mean then on this sort of view about what happiness itself is? Like, what kind of a thing is happiness? We talked a little bit about this in one of the earlier sessions. You know, the extent to which happiness can be described as a sort of feeling or perhaps a certain attitude. My worry with that sort of answer is that these feelings aren't really the thing itself. These feelings, like, you know, emotions and pleasures and pains, they're giving us information. They're telling us how our lives are going, but they are not themselves the thing that are being told. Yeah, we have this distinction between the map and the territory. The feelings are like the map. The territory is how, in fact, you are doing. Is your life going well or badly? And so instead, if you start to appeal to things like the quality of a person's relationships, you start to think along the lines that happiness is more like a state of affairs or a condition of the person in which they are sustaining a relationship with other things that are good. And so a good life is something like a state in which you are relating to things that are good or maintaining this relationship with things that are good. And I do like that as a kind of metaphysical account of what we're talking about here. That generally, you know, an individual is not just this self-contained thing. It's always a thing that's in relationship with its environment and maintaining a certain relationship with its environment. And so you can be doing that well, or you could be doing that badly. So this is promising to me. So our next question is, okay, so you've got this idea that happiness has got something to do with love or maintaining these high quality relationships over the long term. And that's fitting with the empirical evidence. It's fitting something to do with the way that people live. But of course, the main question is then going to be, what is love? You know, how exactly do you define this? That's already a huge can of worms, right? You've got debates going back in philosophy for thousands of years on this subject. If it's something you get into, a particular recommended source is Plato's Symposium. It's one of the great Platonic dialogues and very fun to read, actually. It's quite short. And it offers all these different ideas and some of the major debates that continue to be followed centuries later. But one just initial straightforward point about this is that when we're talking about love, we're not just talking about romantic love. Romantic love gets a lot of attention. It's the one that people most often focus on when they think about love. But we should think about this more broadly, particularly if we're talking about, you know, happiness overall. We don't want to just restrict it to whether or not you get a husband or a wife. So for sure, you want to include friendship. Yeah, so love in a more kind of broad way. You want to include the parent-child relationship, so the parent's love for the child and the child's love for the parent. Beyond those, though, you might also include love for an institution. So you might love your workplace. I know it's rare, but it's possible. You know, you might love the school that you went to, or even you could love certain professions considered as a kind of global institution. So you can imagine someone who loves cinema, loves the practice of cinema. And they're really engaged with that as a thing that humans do over a long period of time, and they're really into the history of it. They're really into how it's going in the world right now and all the kind of details of that. Similarly, you know, I might want to say I love philosophy, not just because I love particular works of philosophy or particular philosophers, but I just love it as a way of being in the world, a particular institution. Um, that, you know, it matters to me, the reputation of this thing, and I devote a lot of attention to it. It gives me joy, that kind of stuff. So that's a broader kind of case of love. Also, we might want to talk about love for objects. So you might have special pieces of jewelry, or, you know, tools that you use day to day, or more broadly, the houses that you live in, your garden that you take care of. All these things, I think, legitimately could be described as love. And then finally, but last but not least at all, that's self-love. Very important case, very important in therapeutic contexts. Is this person showing love for themselves? Are they taking care of themselves? Are they nurturing themselves? That, I think, also can count as a literal case of love. Yeah, so if we're trying to build an account of happiness around these things, we want to include all of these potential cases. We still want some criteria for why something counts as love, however. So one way to specify this a bit more exactly is to think about the object of love as a definite individual in some sense. So the idea here is to distinguish things that we love from things that we merely like. So obviously a person is a definite individual that endures through time, and you can nurture them and care for them. But even something like philosophy, if you understand it as a definite institution with a history of its own, can count as an individual in this sense. It's a kind of spatio-temporal individual. It's not merely a quality. You know, it's not merely a style of thinking. It's something that, a practice that has its own special history. Same you could say about cinema or style of music or something like that. And what's important about these cases is that they have a status of some kind. So by this we mean they can do well or they can do badly. So obviously for a person, that person could be doing well or badly. But similarly for an institution, that institution could be doing well or badly. And you could want to care for that, and, you know, that there's ways to nurture that thing that helps it to do better or worse. What you won't include is things like love of justice, because that's too generic. It's, you know, it's an ideal, it's a certain quality, but you can't take care of justice. You could take care of the law court as a particular institution, right? But justice is just, you know, a good thing. It's a valuable quality. It might be meaningful to pursue justice. It might give you a meaningful life, but it's not the kind of thing you can love or take care of. I think the same would also apply to things like chocolate in a generic sense. So assuming you're not like a chocolate maker, you're not related to chocolate as a particular practice that's got a history and a certain institutional status. It's just a kind of generic quality. You could like it, of course you'd like it, and it's very important that you do, and there's an important overlap with love in this sense. But if you found some tastier food, I think you would just go to that other food. You wouldn't have a kind of sentimental attachment to chocolate. You might have a sentimental attachment to a particular brand of chocolate, like, oh, I love Cherry Ripes, and, you know, I want to nurture Cherry Ripes and work for the Cherry Ripe company, or whatever, right? But chocolate itself would be too generic. And that's, you know, you might think pedantic, but it is quite important for thinking about, you know, what it takes to be good at love and why we love in the ways that we do. In particular, one of the worries that Plato raises all those years ago is why, if we love just like qualities, we don't just instantly transfer our love to the next person who comes along who has those qualities to a higher degree. Yeah, if you love beauty, and you've got a particular beautiful person that you relate to, you might be like, well, the second a more beautiful person comes along, I should love them. I'd be sort of rationally obligated to do that. But that seems completely contrary to, in fact, how people behave. People maintain attachments. That's because Love seems to be a way of committing to a definite individual that has a particular spatio-temporal kind of status. Okay, so that's a criterion, at least hopefully that makes things a bit clearer. So there's this nice paper from 2018 by this Sydney philosopher called Sam Spall. And he breaks down love into 3 key conditions. First condition is devotion. So that means behavior, basically, in which you care for the thing, that you devote a lot of time, you sacrifice other interests for the sake of this thing. Second condition is that it should make you vulnerable in some sense. So in some sense, you rely on that thing for your well-being. So if that thing's doing badly, then you're doing badly. If that thing's doing well, then you're doing well. So you're emotionally kind of tracking it. Similarly, its attitude towards you is something you're vulnerable to. If your beloved holds you in contempt, that's something that's going to affect you deeply, right? Or if they treat you really nicely, that's going to benefit you a great deal. Yes, you see, you're heavily emotionally involved in this thing. And then finally, it should express liking, according to Spall. So there are some accounts of love that say you don't need to like the person you love. It's a bit of a tenuous case, but Spall wants to say, no, liking is definitely part of love. And I agree. I think if you lack liking, you're always going to be a bit detached in your devotion towards them. You're not going to be so motivated. So I do think liking is part of it. And indeed, if you're making connections to well-being, I think it's absolutely helpful to have that. I have my own way of formulating this idea. So Spall's 3 conditions, I think, can all be boiled down to the idea of devotion, where devotion just already implies emotional vulnerability. But also liking, it's not just that love expresses liking, it seems the wrong verb. I would just say you devoted towards things that you experience as having final value. That you just, you feel their value in a very direct way as something that's finally valued for their own sake. And that's pretty much just what pleasure is. Okay. If there are any questions, hang on. If there are any questions, then do flag it. But I'm only seeing my screen in front of me right now, so I'll move on. So one thing to say about love is that it's one of our most sophisticated, if not the most sophisticated, capacity that we have. When you love, you're using your reasoning, you're using your emotions, you're using your physical skills, often as to the greatest extent that you can. So this means that an appeal to love can very directly connect to virtue theory. So you had this argument in virtue theory that the way you're supposed to live is to fulfill your distinctive functions, to kind of max out your humanness in some sense. And I think that love is very much going to satisfy that sort of condition, because we need various skills and excellences in order to love well. So you need your perceptual and emotional sensitivity to what's going on with the other person or the other institution. You need the capacity to regulate and control yourself, to not allow your own difficulties ruin this relationship. The ability to kind of see what's going on with the other person and not just interfere with your own demands all the time. You need skills like listening or just endurance or patience. And, straightforward physical skills like, can you help them? Can you advise them? Can you be around? And knowledge of yourself, knowledge of them, knowledge of the world around you, that feeds into your ability to nurture something. Think about what it takes to care for a child. It's going to take every capacity that you have to do that well. And I do think there's a deep conceptual connection between love and virtue. So, you might ask ourselves, what is the point of being brave? What is the point of being loyal or honest or generous? And I think the point of those excellences is precisely that they allow you to maintain your commitments to things that you love. So you're not just brave for the sake of being brave. You're not just brave in order to be wonderful. You're brave in order to protect something that matters to you a great deal. Yeah, you're brave to protect your family, say. That's what's going to motivate you and ensure that you protect or that you act bravely even when there are pressures against you. Yeah, so when danger arises, do you run away or do you stay? It's only going to be sensible to stay if you've got a really good reason to do that. Similarly, what's the point of being loyal? Well, it's if you want to maintain a certain deep connection with someone because you find them outstandingly valuable. So, one of the problems with virtue theory was like, okay, it's supposed to be bad to be too much of something and bad to be too little of something, and the virtue is the just right level. I think the appeal to a loving commitment is what allows you to set that right level and say, okay, this is the right level of bravery. Like, do I take this risk? Well, is it going to end up sacrificing or undermining this important relationship, or is it going to support that? That's what's going to allow me to calibrate that. So more broadly, when we appeal to love as these kind of central features of the good life, it has this attraction that it allows us to incorporate these other theories that we've been looking at so far. And that's always a powerful technique in philosophy. When you get any debate that's been lasting for centuries, the chances are that everyone's picked up something correct, and it's just hard to see how they all fit together. So there's clearly something right about hedonism. There's clearly something right about virtue theory and desire theory. If we can find the best way to combine those things, then that's a really good sign. So I've already explained how love connects to virtue, but it clearly also connects very deeply to desire. I mean, our loves are going to be the most powerful, enduring desires that we have. And it's also going to be pleasurable, right? In general, you should be liking the things you love. You should be getting pleasure from them. So that's kind of a good feature as well. It's not going to allow us to endorse all desires, and it's not going to allow us to endorse all pleasures, right? So some pleasures might undermine your love, and some desires might undermine your love. But that's again a good thing. Like when you say desire is the only thing that's good, you end up having to endorse bad desires. When you say pleasure is the only good, you end up potentially having to endorse bad pleasures. But love is going to give you a criterion for saying when the pleasure is good or when a desire is good. So one of the ways I'm going to sell this theory is to say, well, love allows these various components of a good life to be coherently organized. It's going to allow you to link up the various facts about your life and the various things that you have to do into something coherent that lasts over many years. And, you may well, as part of love, do things that are somewhat unpleasant. You might have to change a dirty nappy, say, or help someone carry a heavy load. But those things become worthwhile because of their contribution to this central value that you have. I think more important than any of that, though, is that when people speak about desires and pleasures and virtues, it often seems a bit too self-directed, as if what's good in life is just that you are this well-functioning machine. But again, I think that's the wrong way to think about the good life. I think what is much more attractive is to say that the good life is being in relation to things that are good, like to say of something outside of you, this is a good thing. This is a wonderful thing. I mean, and it's kind of my happiness to relate to that good thing. Again, this could include self-love, right? So you could be one of the good things. Yeah, and your status as a person can be something that you treasure. It's just not the only good thing. Whereas, on some understandings of virtue theory, it would seem like you are the only really good thing. And that just seems selfish and self-involved, right? So I think a more plausible theory of happiness is, okay, I am one of the good things along with everything else. And cherishing myself has to be balanced against cherishing all these other things outside as well. Okay, so that's the initial point in favor of of placing love in some sense central to happiness. So it seems to incorporate these other aspects of the good life that other theories have identified. It's allowing us to say, okay, you're relating to things of outstanding value for their own sake. It allows us to incorporate lots and lots of different kinds of love. That all seems like a good point in favor. But straight away, a big problem for this view is that, sometimes you can love something and it just ruins your life, right? It's just absolutely horrific. So clearly, merely loving something isn't sufficient for a good life. It might be necessary on what I've said so far. It might be definitely beneficial in some respects from what I've said so far, but it can't be sufficient because there's all kinds of ways in which love can go terribly wrong. And that can be your fault because you love badly, or it could be the fault of the thing you love. You just love the wrong thing, and you love someone who's completely unfaithful, screws you over, what have you. So we need to add some additional conditions in order to come up with a theory that's plausible, such that you could say, okay, once you have these things, then you're definitely having a good life. And so I think this is an interesting aspect, and it's one that other philosophers haven't really thought about very much, which I find quite surprising. But it seems fairly natural to say, okay, it's not enough just to love something. In some sense, your love has to go well, has to achieve its aims. And particularly when you're talking about love for persons, it looks like the appeal to reciprocation or requitedness is going to be a major tactic, right? So okay, so love for a person goes well when, in some sense, I'm able to maintain that loving connection. And the best way for me to maintain a loving connection with another person is that they love me back, right? So I appreciate them and I take care of them and I nurture them. And in response, they direct the same sorts of nurturing, caring, appreciative attitudes towards me. That's now a strong, loving relationship that now looks like, oh, yes, that's the kind of thing that plausibly is good for that person. I mean, unrequited love can be good in some respects, right? You've got this ideal, you've got this thing that you admire, often way out of proportion, over-idealized. But it's not even slightly as good as when that love is returned and you're having an actual robust relationship and you're able to do things together and so on. So that sort of positive feedback structure in which the thing you love loves you back, that's going to be the really paradigm, excellent case of what makes life good. So to give a kind of technical definition of success here, what reciprocation does, it allows you to maintain your engagement with qualities of the beloved that you take to be positive. So their beauty, their sense of humor, their friendliness, and so on. Question then is, okay, can we apply a similar sorts of account to other kinds of love? So we can talk about reciprocation a bit for institutions. So if you have a job in an institution, big company or whatever, you can say, yeah, there's a kind of reciprocation involved there where the people in the company treat you well, they value your contributions are respected and you aren't exploited, and things like that. So that sort of works. And same for friendship. But it's not going to work so well for self-love or love for objects. So generally speaking, objects can't reciprocate my love. And it's a bit odd. You might sort of squint and say, yeah, maybe there's a kind of reciprocation involved in self-love, but it looks like we need a different word. So instead of saying reciprocation in these cases, I think it's best to just say successful love. So what does it mean to successfully love an object like a garden or a house or a piece of jewelry? Well, you can say, well, again, it's successful if you maintain access to its positive qualities. So you say you love a car. You maintain access to its car excellences, its ability to carry you from A to B, to maintain a certain nice form and function and all the rest of it, right? In particular, I have this idea that beloved objects can sometimes offer gifts. So we don't directly dictate what makes them good. They just sort of, they strike you with their goodness. So, maybe the car has this functional excellence that you did not directly inculcate, or the flower perhaps that you love blooms magnificently without you having to exactly specify how that went. You could even love a book that you're writing, in a sense that the book suddenly reveals to you, or unexpectedly it has all this interesting momentum to it, or little additional meanings that you didn't realize were there originally. So that's what's going to count successful love for an object. For self-love, I think the best way to think about this is that, in some sense, you do well at taking care of yourself. So I have a PhD student who's just finished a PhD on how self-love can be modeled on parental love. In particular, there's models of parental love where it's sort of, you're supposed to use your reason to guide the child, but also you're supposed to respond to their needs and be emotionally involved as well. And the good parent's supposed to, have authority, have reason, but also, care and love and, appreciate the child and have emotions that do work as well. So the idea, again, is just that you're maintaining access to your own excellences, or you're pushing yourself to develop excellences, like the way a parent might do that for their child. I'm going to talk a bit more about this, I think, in a later lecture. I'm going to talk about whether competition is good for us. And I think the connection to self-love might be a way to say that competition is good for us sometimes. But I'll leave that aside for now. Just the idea is just going to be, well, maybe, sometimes. But let's assume that we have some idea of what self-love is for now and when that can go well or badly. It's got something to do with taking care of yourself the way that a good parent would take care of you. All right. So you've got successful love in all these different ways. But another factor is going to be how your loves are balanced against each other. So again, one love is not going to make a happy life. It's going to be more like a broader arrangement or pattern of these things. So you might say, okay, one way to tell whether you're loving well is if you're able to balance that love against other loves. So in particular, one way to identify a toxic relationship is to say, well, in some sense, it was, I'm serving this person, but they're not treating me well. So they're undermining my self-love. Or similarly, a love for another person could be narcissistic if you're just in it in order for them to give you benefits and you're not really serving them. So there your self-love isn't well balanced with your other love, right? You're loving badly. You're taking and you're not giving, right? So what all these balances of loves can do, they help to just calibrate. Yeah, so the way you can tell whether you are loving badly or whether you are being loved badly is if you've managed to establish this balance of all your various loves, and also if you're able to and that's allowing you to maintain access to qualities that you consider to be positive. So again, in a toxic relationship, you're accessing their negative qualities, or your sense of their negative qualities is undermining your sense of their positive qualities. You can have both at the same time, but you're not getting proper engagement with their positive qualities over time. There's this kind of sour note going on there as well. All right, so because we're not talking about one love, but we're talking about a set of such loves, the next question is going to be, how many of these things are you supposed to be having? And this is kind of a brutal point, right? That there is a quantitative aspect to this. The devotion is motivational. It's behavior, and it takes energy, and that you can dissipate this devotion by loving too many things, right? So giving devotion to one thing can take it away from another thing that also merits devotion. At the same time, being devoted to just one thing and just making one thing the thing you love can be bad as well, right? That you smother them, you overwhelm them, you just, you're a helicopter parent, whatever it might be. So it looks like as if more than one, but less than 50. And where in between, unclear. It's going to depend on how much they need from you and how much you need from them, right? but I don't think we can easily say like the more kids you have, the less you'll love all of them, because your love sort of interact with each other as well. So it's going to be ultimately a very, very complicated question. I think all we can say at the most general level is just some, such that if you lose one, you're not totally devastated. But not too many, such that you're unable to devote any attention and time when things need it. And that's going to depend on how independent those things are, how much they need from you, the nature of the connection, whether it's an institution, say, or an object, or what have you. All right, so here is the claim, drawing on all this stuff that I've said so far. We're going to define happiness as a pattern of successful love. So we've understood what successful love is, and pattern is just going to be a way all these things combine to give an overall structure to your life. So the other is you're going to fill your life, or all the aspects of your life, all the domains of your life are going to be structured around these particular special cases, these particular special things, special people, special institutions, what have you. So that's the overall picture, but it's going to allow for lots of variations on that. So for some people, it could involve a romantic relationship and maybe a nice job. But for someone else, it could be, that they take care of their house and their garden, they have a few friends. For a third person, maybe it doesn't involve any friends at all. Maybe they're just like contented living on their own somewhere, but they love nature around them, or they have a pet dog or something like that, right? I mean, in general, if you want all the domains of their life to be structured around a successful love, you want to say that all their capacities are in some sense fulfilled. So I would say that although dogs can love us back, they won't allow us to kind of express our deeper innermost feelings. So you won't get that sort of level of reciprocation, or you won't get that outlet for your capacities. But yeah, you could compensate in various ways, and you could structure your life in various ways, such that your various needs are ultimately all delivered. Now, one aspect of it is, okay, what about all the other stuff, the things that we don't love? How are they involved here? So I said, you couldn't love chocolate, but you can still have chocolate, right? That's still going to be part of a good life. So you want to be able to incorporate that stuff. And I think this theory, which I'm calling the amorist theory, I think it can incorporate that stuff. But ultimately, you're going to say something like, well, those things aren't always good. We don't always endorse those things. We sometimes reject them, even if they're sensory pleasures. So I do think what you can say when you say a happy life is structured around loves is that, in some sense, we endorse a simple pleasure to the extent that we say, okay, it's compatible with the things that we love. So you might say that you've got a general landscape of values, and there are certain key objects that hold that landscape together. Those are your loves, but everything can still contribute to that overall landscape. So, is indulging in this chocolate going to be bad for my self-love? Then I won't do it, or it won't be good for me in the long term to do it. Okay, so I think that's something that we can manage, but there are other more difficult objections to this theory. So, first big objection is this really going to be sufficient for a good life? So, I've said, okay, as long as your love's successful and you've got a bunch of these things, you're basically supposed to be happy. But is it not possible that you could be in a successful, loving relationship and still be unhappy? For whatever reason, you're doing badly together, even if you're both acknowledging each other as, wonderful beings, right? Now, I already talked about cases of toxic love, and I think I can rule those out already as unsuccessful kinds of love. But there might be other kinds of cases that are just tragic, right? Where they're dying of some horrible, illness. There's nothing you can do about it. So even though you both love each other, you might be very, very unhappy. Yeah, so I do think before I get to that, I think the obvious way to respond to this is that, okay, yeah, if they're doing awfully, I'm no longer having good engagement with their positive qualities. They can't be doing that badly. And for me to still count myself as in a successful love with that person. The problem is, if you give that sort of solution, you end up potentially in a circular theory. Okay, so the idea is that successful love, you're successfully engaging with their positive qualities. But then, okay, what does that really mean when you get into the details? So presumably they're healthy or they're sustaining their positive qualities, but what does that mean? If someone's just satisfying their drives, again, the problem with that is that could be greedy or trivial. They're just wasting their lives in various ways. So if you push this, you end up saying, well, okay, in some sense, they've got to be happy too, right? To engage with a person who is doing well is to engage with their positive qualities. But then the risk here is that, okay, you can only successfully love people who are themselves happy. And since, again, successful love for a person is generally crowned by reciprocation, it seems like you successfully love them if they successfully love you. So your happiness relies on them being happiness, which relies on your happiness, which relies on their happiness, in a kind of circle. You're like, okay, this is a problem. That in some sense, the happiness of even one person now relies on the happiness of every single person that they love as well. Now, it wouldn't be crazy to say that one person's happiness relies on another person's happiness. So this is a tradition in philosophy where people talk about, what's the nature of the bond in love? And you sometimes get this idea that there's a kind of mutual pursuit of happiness. So Robert Nozick says that we form this new thing, this we, that is this kind of mutual subject of well-being. I mean, that seems a bit perhaps exaggerated. There's another paper by this guy, Neil Delaney, who says, well, actually, the ideal isn't like oneness, total unity. It's more like sovereign states forming a republic. Doesn't sound particularly romantic. But the idea is just that there's a degree of separateness there, but there's also a degree of common purpose. So it's not a kind of slavish loss of identity to this group being. It's more that there's a bond between two separate things. So there's a nice bit in Khalil Gibran's The Prophet where he says, love one another, but make not a bond of love. Let it rather be a moving sea between the shores of your souls. I thought that was always a nice poetic image. Okay, so based on that sort of idea, I think we don't want to allow that happiness of one person is the happiness of every single person that they love. That's going to make happiness just over demanding to achieve. And there's also just got to be a straightforward, common sense way in which you could be in a successful, loving relationship, and you could still be slightly happier than the people that you love, or they could be slightly happier than you, even if there can't be such a disparity that you're enjoying them doing terribly. So I think the way to just think about this in a more kind of common sense way is just that we are not everything to each other. We have limited roles to play in each other's lives. So you might have a partner, and you're heavily involved in the things that are going on for them, but you're not absolutely on top of everything that's happening. So you're not on top of everything that's going on in their jobs or their other relationships with other people. And so I think thinking in those terms, you can say, look, as long as you're satisfying that particular relational role, you're sort of engaging with the qualities that are relevant to that relationship. That could all be going well, while other aspects of that person's life maybe aren't going so well. And you could be offering them support, and generally speaking, but if you're doing kind of fulfilling your role, that's a successful love. So the way you might think of it is that we all have our kind of zones of happiness, and my zone of happiness might overlap a great deal with my beloved's zone of happiness, in that there's a lot of our lives that we are coordinating, a lot of these qualities that we're kind of mutually sharing, but it's not an entire overlap, and they've got a bunch of stuff going on as well outside of the relationship they had with me. And so these zones of happiness might overlap and fill out the entire world this way, but they're not going to be, my happiness is not going to be identical to another person's happiness. Okay, so that's one issue. Second issue is like, okay, is it necessary to have successful love in order to be happy? Is it not possible to be happy and love nothing? So an interesting version of this challenge is to think about the happiness of children. So you might think, children, they go around, they play, they get, they mess about, they get lots of sleep, they can flourish without necessarily having any kind of deep attachments. So I do think that's an interesting issue, and I think we have mentioned it in this topic before when we talked about virtue theory and children. And I do think one interesting point about the happiness of children is that it doesn't tend to be very robust. It's quite fragile. They rely on the protection of other people, but that doesn't mean that they can't themselves be happy. So one point I think to make about this, and I think is just to say, well, I think a child's happiness is going to, in some sense, depend on love. In particular, they need to be loved by others, which is in some sense outsourcing their self-love until such a point as they're able to take care of themselves. But more than that, I think kids do love things. They love their parents, they love their siblings, hopefully sometimes. They love their soft toys, they love their friends. What they won't tend to do is have very deep, passionate feelings about these things, because they don't realize how vulnerable those things are. So they won't have the kind of protective emotions, the kind of jealousies or the kind of anxieties that the parents might have, because they don't realize that these things could be lost and destroyed. But if they are lost and destroyed, they will definitely have the emotions then, so if you destroy the child's soft toy, they're not going to like that at all. But they might not have realized before that just how much they love the toy, right? So the idea is just happy children do love things, and they do maintain successful loves. They just might not be having the kind of affective profiles, the kind of deep emotions that would prove to them or indicate to them those loving connections. Okay, so that's the version of this challenge for the child. You might also think, no, but isn't it possible, at least possible, for like an adult to be happy and yet not love anything at all? They're just going around enjoying themselves. Isn't that possible? And again, you remember when we're evaluating a philosophy theory, if there's just one case that's a counterexample, the theory is potentially wrong. So I did come across this film a few years ago called Perfect Days, which does seem to articulate this kind of problem in a somewhat realistic way. So you've got this guy in Tokyo called Hirayama, and he's a toilet cleaner. And it's quite an Epicurean film. It's kind of doing the Epicurean good life in that he's deliberately living a very, very simple life. He cleans the toilets, but he doesn't find that unpleasant. He does his job. He appreciates nature. He reads books. He listens to music. Takes photographs. He's not unfriendly. He just doesn't have any friends. He doesn't get sucked into any attachments. And as you're watching the film, I do recommend you watch it if you have the time. It becomes clear that this isn't just something that's happened to him naturally. He's sort of, in some sense, deliberately rejected past attachments. So he has this niece that comes and visits him for a few days because she's running away from home or something. And he's not unfriendly to this person, but in the end, he's not out to take care of this girl. And there's other cases as well where he just seems to kind of shrug off certain attachments. So certainly the film shows us that this guy is, he's enjoying himself. He's doing all right. But I think when you think a bit more deeply about it, I think it's quite plausible to say that he's not doing as well as he could have been. So if he had been developing at least one friendship, or just having one pet dog, he could be doing even better. And besides this, there's a sense in which he's neglecting powerful sources of value that are available to him. So, his niece is a person. She's, beautiful, worthwhile person in her own right. And although he's not unfriendly to her, he doesn't care about her that much that he's going to, really help sure that she's taken care of, right? and similarly for the other kinds of connections that present themselves to this guy. So in some sense, he's neglecting sources of value, and that's in some sense, I think, a fault. Although he might be doing it for various emotional reasons, his life could be much more devoted. It could be much more worthwhile. All right, I don't have any much more time, but I might just very briefly address one issue, and then you can look at the notes for yourself. So there was just a final worry I have, and it's a general worry about theories of happiness. It's like, are these theories telling me that I have to be constantly experiencing pleasure, constantly satisfying desires in order to max out my happiness? You know, if someone comes along and gives me a survey saying, okay, how happy are you? If I rate myself 10 out of 10, like what kind of life do I actually have to be living there? So I do think this is a legitimate worry. Like, is my theory exhausting? Like, what would it take to actually max out happiness on this theory? And I do think that this kind of theory does allow that you don't have to be constantly feeling pleasure. You don't have to be constantly mooning over your beloved. The basic metaphysics is going to be that you sustain this connection, but sustaining a connection does not involve necessarily consciously, actively doing things all the time. Even sleeping with them could count. Sleeping for yourself is a kind of self-love as well. So this is just something I worry about. Like, how would I turn this theory into a measure of happiness? Something that a scientist could actually use productively to explore this. And so this is something I tinker with, and we don't really have time to think about it now, but I keep tinkering with this, and I'd be interested in getting your feedback when we meet up again after the midterm. What does it mean to in the day-to-day case, like how do you measure when a time is spent happy or not? And so I have a suggested idea that it's, you're engaging well with the positive qualities, but you're also not undermining those positive qualities, and you're also not having to engage with things that you dislike. But yeah, I keep tinkering with that, and I'd be interested to see if anyone has views on that. Okay, so just to wrap up, I do think there's something broadly intuitively plausible about this theory. I do think it fits the evidence that we have. I think it's a definite good feature that it integrates aspects of other theories. And also, it does tell us that although happiness might be hard to max out in all these ways, it's not impossible. So that's me kind of giving you the hard sell of that theory, and then it's up to you now to evaluate that for yourselves. And by no means are you required to believe in that. You will not be given extra credit in this class for believing what your lecturer says. I want to see you think about this stuff for yourself. But I thought I needed to kind of tell you what I thought about these things as well.